Yeah, my name is Rose, and I grew up in Iowa and lived in Minnesota, South Dakota before coming to Nebraska. And the reason I care about history is because when I moved here, I ran into all kinds of strange things that I never experienced anywhere else. All the places I lived. Part is I immediately got sick with all kinds of weird sickness that didn't make sense, but also I'd run into conflicts at different churches, and all over town people would have the same mindset, and it wasn't anything I ran into elsewhere. So I was wondering what's wrong with the whole city, the whole state, that there's clouds of stuff I haven't run into. And so it's been my digging of why God, dear God, what's wrong that led me to care about history? And I'm hoping that people here in this room that are prayer warriors can maybe pray into how do we fix it? Revival comes with repentance, and, may God lead us, but that's the reason why we're doing this. And something I found is that in the Bible, we reap what we sow, but besides, consequences for our own personal, besides the consequences we have for our own personal choices, we can inherit trouble through, especially as a nation or as a state, we can inherit trouble from other places. Like in the Bible, Gideon was in a nation that was getting overrun by their enemies, and they're getting robbed of food every time they planted, and so they were starving. And he's like, dear God, where are your miracles? And the reason they were in trouble is because his father had set up an altar to Baal, and God told him, get the cow and pull the altar down. And they had miracles ever after the idol was down, but taking down his father's altar was the first thing he had to do. Or when David was king, there was a famine because his predecessor had done a genocide. David wasn't the one guilty, but there was consequences for the whole nation until there was punishment for those that were guilty. And Jehoshaphat the king, when he went to battle alone, he had amazing, miraculous victory. But whenever he made an alliance with Ahab or with Ahab's son, he had crazy defeat. So he had righteousness, but when he was in covenant, the sin of those he was partnering with affected him. And for one of the battles, they're marching out, and they've got 3 kings going together, and they almost all die of thirst before they get to an enemy because God was against them. Or there was this other time he built a fleet of ships to make money, and God sunk the ships in the harbor, and they never got anywhere. And the prophet warned him, saying, because you have allied with King Ahaziah, son of Ahab, the Lord will destroy your work. And so as I'm looking through history, I'm looking for sin that we can repent of, because there are things that might have happened 100 years ago that still affect us today. And I guess the next thing I'm sharing on is the concept of agreement. The enemy doesn't have power without the church giving it to him. And I've got testimonies from 2 different Satanists that came out of it and have something to share.
You know what's crazy to me, though? How many people have to come out of the occult, out of Satanism, out of witchcraft, being a warlock, all these crazy things, and literally warn Christians not to celebrate Halloween? Story time. When I was in witchcraft, bro, literally on the day of Halloween, the spirit guides, which were demons that I thought were angels, will literally give me missions on Halloween. A lot of y'all have zero to no discernment of spiritual things and spirits, and that's sad. If you fought to have discernment as much as you fight to celebrate wickedness and darkness, you'd understand. You see, because I understood that in the spirit, we needed permission. We needed something to open the door, something to give us access to be able to do the things that we went out and did. I remember my first big mission in New Orleans, the day of Halloween, before we went outside to go pray over streets and businesses and people and all these things. I thought I was blessing people, but I was really cursing them. I asked the spirit guys, hey, don't we need permission? Don't we need to ask them before we come here and bless them? Don't I have to seek some type of spiritual approval? This is what each and every single one of my spirit guides, I had 7, told me. Emmanuel, their participation in Halloween is their agreement. It is the open door. It is how you guys are able to not have to ask for permission, because they already gave permission in the spirit by celebrating. When they decorate their home and make their home participate in Halloween, you have access to their home. When they put out all this stuff in their businesses, you have access to their business. When they dress up their kids and make their kids participate, you have access to their kids. When they dress up their pets and go out with their pets dressed up, you have access to their pets. You have one eye covered by candy and another eye covered by costumes, so no wonder you can't see evil. Despite there being so many scriptures against why you shouldn't celebrate Halloween, y'all will still tell us that we're being legalistic. Stay away from all appearance of evil. Appearance, just the appearance of it. But for one day a year, a church will say, we're going to do trunk or treat and we're going to try to redeem evil. And we're going to change our appearance for just one day to be more like them.
Yeah, so that's some crazy stuff. But he says, by putting on the clothes, we give permission. And here's another guy who's got a really cool story.
John says Satan became the father he never had. John was devoted to him.
I light up my candles. I spit the rum. I spit the cigar smoke. The cigar smoke means power. If I didn't have money for a rooster, I'd cut myself and use my own blood and pour it in. The whole atmosphere of the room changes. And you know there's something there. And then when it's there, you have to dress them like a family member. My father, I'm here. What would you like to speak to me about? What is it that you want me to do?
As time went on, John also practiced the dark arts outside his apartment. He preyed on Christians in particular.
At the clubs, I would go around looking for Christians. And I knew that in the club, you was in the devil's playground. So I knew that if I can get into it and you had a beer or two already in your system, I knew all I had to do was just say, listen, I have something to tell you today. And right now you will open the door because you said, what is it you need to tell me? You gave me gateway.
Eventually, John became a high priest in Palo Mayombe, a form of African spiritualism. As he became more powerful, John took warfare seriously.
The devil told me that I had to go into the neighborhood in the spirit realm in order to weaken it in the natural. Whatever you kill in the spirit realm, you can kill in the natural. So I will leave my body home and I should project myself into different boroughs, different regions, different states, different countries. And as I follow the neighborhood, I would speak curses into the neighborhood, speak things that I wanted to happen into the neighborhood. Sometimes I will go into neighborhoods and I see this group of people in the spirit realm in the corner praying, holding hands, heads bowed, praying up a storm. And there was no accomplishment in that neighborhood. That neighborhood was sanctified, blessed, through prayer. You couldn't touch it. But the other neighborhoods, it was party time.
Yeah, so with those two videos, there was a couple different forms of agreement covered, and then, yeah, I guess I got that slide after these verses, but in the Old Testament, people that had authority could cancel vows and covenants made by others, like parents could cancel covenants made by their children, or husbands could cancel vows made by their wives. And in the Bible, it also says that Jesus, when he was sent out to 72, he said that he gave us authority over all the powers of evil. And so, but with that previous verse about the husband has the power to cancel his wife's vow, if he hears the vow and says nothing, that means he agrees. So silence is a form of consent. So we've got the power. But do we use it, or do we get tricked into giving our agreement away? So some different forms of agreement. One is like your belief, like faith is fear, fear is faith in Satan. We've got faith in God. God can work all things together for good. Or fear is, oh my goodness, the devil's so strong, I'm going to get destroyed. We can give agreement with our words. Like John said, he'd get permission from people to give them words. Participation, putting on the clothes, going through a ritual, silence. And then parades are an interesting form of agreement, but in the New Testament, it talks about parades like triumph parades, and Jesus leads us in the triumph. The Roman triumph, whenever someone conquered a nation, they'd have the celebration parade, and the victor would go first, and all the captives follow behind. Or when they were conquering Jericho, they marched around it, and the presence of God went first, and the people followed behind. Or in the book of Esther, the king says to Haman, what should I do for someone that I want to honor? And he's like, dress him up and walk him through the streets and make proclamations. And there's other ways of agreeing, but when we build a monument of someone, that's a celebration. That's saying we agree with something they did. They're a hero to us. So just hold on to that. And then, my other concept is that when someone has a purpose or a destiny, the devil's going to attack you for that thing, and he might even use it as bait. Eve's purpose was to be like God and be in his image, and she wanted it so bad the devil could use that to get her to do bad things. Or, Abraham had a purpose to be a father, and the war was always over does he have a wife? Is it going to happen? Or he was tempted to sin because he's trying to be a father. So those are my two foundations. But with the history of Omaha, there's a lot of different identity words that I've found tied to it, and they all seem to be tied to the First Nations that are here. And the theme tonight is unity, tied to the First Nation of Lakota. And their name means friend, ally. And the enemy is trying to rename them and give them a different identity. Sioux means little snake. It's not a nice word. And but that's used by the government and used by a lot of people, and sometimes they give up on fighting that one. But if you meet someone that says that they're Sioux, they are Lakota, Nakota, Dakota, let's speak good things over them. And unity's always been big to them. There's a quote from one of their chiefs saying, good things come through unity. And one of their historical stories that they're famous for is when they were attacked by Custer, they had friends, and they were able to call on their friends, the Cheyenne and Arapaho, and gather a lot of warriors to actually have an overwhelming victory. They're one of the very few tribes that had a victory over the U.S. military. And then they felt like there was hard feelings and wounds that were from that battle, so it was their idea to do a reconciliation ceremony with the descendants a bunch of years later. And for their monument, they put it on there, peace through unity. So that is a theme that we see running through Nebraska identity. People talk unity all the time. But it can be bait into bad things. And as the frontier was moving west, crossing Iowa, the Methodists were an amazing missionary sending, circuit riding force for good. And I think in 1844, they said, we don't want our pastors to participate in Freemasonry. And one of the pastors went out and did. And so when they called him up for review of are you following what's right or not, they found out that he was in Freemasonry. And when they called him on it, he cried and had a tantrum, had a big speech. Oh, you dement, I renounce this thing that's so good. This is such a painful decision. If you're going to ask me to give up one or the other, I give up being in the church. That made everyone uncomfortable. And so they caved. And after an awkward silence, they said, oh, if you feel that strong, I'll join too. I'll join too. Throw the rules out. And a lot of those pastors that joined went to the highest rank and shaped the course of the entire Western frontier. And for him, they didn't remove him from office. They gave him his position back. He kept pushing the Freemasonry. And he became the first presiding elder over the Council Bluffs district, which included Omaha. I will get back to him. There's consequences. But yeah, as the world moves, there was a law proposed that ripped America in two. That was the Nebraska Bill. And here's some interesting words, but it says there was a few words that were in that bill for Nebraska that would cancel the Missouri Compromise, and people that were asleep woke up. Suddenly, pastors got motivated and started writing letters, and eventually Lincoln got elected president, and people got a victory. And that came part through the effort of pastors. So when, with the Missouri Compromise, it was a deal with evil. We're going to ban slavery in the states that are so cold it's not practical anyway, and call that a victory, and we'll just keep slavery safely in the South. And with the Nebraska Bill, it would suddenly be that Nebraska could be a slave state, and that's when people woke up and got angry. But the pastors wrote letters. At one time, there was a petition 250 feet long signed by 3,000 clergymen saying, defeat the Nebraska bill. And it was a step, a catalyst towards getting things done when the pastors didn't agree. But now back to Nebraska. This guy here was the first resident of the Omaha area, and he was a Freemason that was very high rank. There was a rule that said people can't be living on the Omaha side of the river yet, and he just got the President of the United States to write an exception for him so that he could be here first and have the best land and set out the rules. And one of the things that was his idea, the Homestead Act said that people could, when it was finally, the treaty said that white people could come here, there was a rule that said anyone could claim a quarter section if they lived on it. And he said, no, I want to get 2 quarter sections. And he made this secret society that if you join, we're all going to take a double portion, and if anyone moves into legitimately open land that someone else wanted, we're going to torture them until they leave. We're going to drive out people from taking the legitimately open land so that we all get double and we'll be rich. And a lot of people that they tortured died shortly afterwards. It was terrorism. And I just think that's a sad choice that, like, the first founders of Omaha knew what they were doing, and because someone talked them into mob violence, they did, and that's the foundation of the city. But the people that participated in killing others are a lot of the first founders of Omaha. But one of the things that Alfred Jones did was set up different lodges for Freemasonry. And what's sad is that the pastors didn't know how to just visit each other and have a prayer meeting. The pastors joined the Masons to figure out how to have unity and have a good time together. And pastors, because they offer something valuable, he said he changed the rules to make it easier for them to join. And there were bunches of pastors that joined in those early days. And there were consequences. Like the first one that joined, failed at his mission to start a church. The next one, Freemasonry asks you to curse your wives, daughters, and stuff. And here we have in the book, the first person to die was his wife. So it was a bad thing. But back to the Lakota, we could have had peace with the Lakota. They had been received missionaries. They wanted peace. But there was a time when, as the Mormons were moving west, there was a lame cow that was fallen behind, and the guy just let it fall behind, and it wandered to a Lakota camp. But then the guy told the army that the Lakota stole it, and the Lakota came and demanded the cow, and the chief said, hey, I'll give you a cow, but the army shot him, killed him, and that led to war. And so there are all these different fights that were brutal. And one of the generals that got called to participate was named Harney, and he shot people even though they had a white flag, shot a bunch of women and children. And it was a terrible thing. And we have a street named in his honor. What he did was butcher people waving a white flag, women and children. Why do we honor him? But that's the kind of agreement. The native people that come to America say they feel a heaviness. They feel like as long as we have that street named, we agree with their death. Hey, back to Shin. He's the one that, he didn't renounce Masonry. So now he's rich. He moved to Omaha. He installs pastors, puts cornerstones on churches. And he's also wheeling and dealing, getting rich through money or through real estate. And there's a weird story that he married someone that's a third of his age. And it was a scandal. But she died suddenly of weird causes. I don't know. But here is the second pastor of the church that he started. So after the first pastor, Collins, left, here's the next one. He was also involved in all kinds of Freemasonry, and it messed with his head, and he was messed up. And eventually he joined the military, moved to Colorado, and he committed the worst atrocity against Native Americans in U.S. history, riding into a camp of people that were at peace and shooting them all. And he was bent on genocide. And the U.S. military hardly condemns any of the stuff that they were behind, but they said this guy's an inhuman monster. But what's interesting is, like, the Omaha history says he would have had consequences, except the lodges and the churches worked to keep him from consequences. And I feel like that might be a pattern I see today of people are afraid to expose things that have happened in the past. They don't want the embarrassment. So that's why I bring it up. It's like there was a super bad battle where they were chopping up children and dismembering them, and the churches said, we don't want any consequences. And when he died, they gave this beautiful funeral, said, this is a good guy. But hey, the happy story, where the church does good things. In 1877, the U.S. military forced the mostly Christian Ponca off of their treaty lands to march them to Oklahoma, which is the Ponca Trail of Tears. They arrived in Oklahoma too late to plant, and by spring, a third of them had died of disease or starvation. Chief Standing Bear, as his son lay dying, asked that he could be buried in his homeland. So Standing Bear came back with 30 others and got to Nebraska. But the government heard about them and arrested him when he got back. And they were planning to death march them. They were sick, and the government was going to march them back on a route that would have killed them. But a pastor heard about it. Henry Tibbles, who was a pastor, church planter, and later became a journalist, he interviewed him, heard the story, and the same day he jogged back from Fort Omaha to town where the churches were and spoke at 2 different churches that night. He stirred up people, got a lot of churches moving. The pastors wrote a letter of protest to Washington, and they also formed a committee to deal with the needs that were needed. They raised money to hire lawyers. Congregational, Episcopal, Jewish, Methodist, Presbyterian believers all worked together to defend and to support the Ponca. And the government said that Standing Bear is not a citizen, so he couldn't, or a person, so he couldn't sue. But the churches gave him his chance to speak in court.
Nombe te hihate ewaki gumbaji. My hand is not the same color as yours. If I pierce it, I shall feel pain. If you pierce your hand, you too will feel pain. The blood that flows will be the same color. I am a man. The same God made us both.
So that was amazing. And Standing Bear himself was a Christian, but with the help of all the other pastors in town, they got a victory. And the court recognized that Native Americans are people. It was the first time it happened in the United States. The federal government was not happy about it, and they planned to appeal to the Supreme Court. But they used that same strategy of church unity. Tibbles and Standing Bear went and toured the churches in the East, and when the government could see that the churches on the East were with Standing Bear, they dropped the case. So the word from Omaha prevailed. Nebraska, first state to recognize personhood of Native Americans. But then we go to a sad story against unity. This guy worked in government and wrote a book, and he says that in 1891, there was a plague worse than the locusts of Egypt and the hookworms and all their other plagues, and it was called the APA, American Protective Association. This was a cult that was focused on hating the Catholics, and it says they were so sure the Pope of Rome was going to take over Omaha's courthouse that they lost their minds. And their writing is ridiculous, but it had some real consequences. So it was an anti-Catholic secret society, and they swore oath that we're never going to hire, vote for, or go on strike with a Catholic worker. The founding members were Methodist, Baptist, Congregational, Lutheran, but definitely Freemasons with them. And they had this forged letter from the Pope saying to kill us all. That scared people, and fear gives power to the devil. And they also hated Italian and Irish immigrants. And in Omaha, there were about 4,000 in 1891. And they had a newspaper, and I've read some of their newspapers. Most of the articles were written by anonymous people. But in the first newspaper, there was an article written by Albert Pike, who was a very high Freemason. And it seemed he was very bothered that the Pope had said Freemasonry is bad. And so he's ranting and very angry about it. And all the papers, angry hate speech, it's weird stuff. But they had ugly political cartoons. Look, the Pope has the Republicans and Democrats both be angry. Oh, they're in government. And God wants Christians to speak up, and the Masons were mad that Catholics were getting involved with government, and so they were trying to silence them. And here they rewrite the Bible to say, if you give to the poor, you're not giving to God, you're just giving to the Pope. So rewriting the Bible, it's blasphemous. But it was effective, and here it says they're leaving, Buddhism's okay, Islam's okay, all the other religions are tolerated, but Catholics are despised and get in trouble. It was crazy, like Salem witchcraft hysteria. Juries were packed, it was unjust, and they got all their candidates elected. Previously, there was good people in government that left a surplus in every fund, but they got voted out and replaced by saloon keepers and scoundrels and people in debt that robbed the treasury and made things bad. It only lasted for a few years, but they looted the treasury and robbed the widows. And what's rough about that is if back in the day there was no Social Security or social services, and if the government's not going to take care of orphans and widows, and the churches suddenly have a lot of people that are unemployed and in trouble, there's not really much help for these people to survive. So probably the widows and orphans ended up down here, the burnt district. I put it on a modern map so you can see where it is. That's like by the CHI Center, Douglas DeCass, and right now it's an entertainment part of town, and it was back then also. It was just different entertainment. And we know a lot about it because of a woman who survived and wrote a book, and she says, for 20 years, I lived there. And her book is really interesting. And she says, it's not my intention to condemn good men and women, but to awaken them to some awful facts. I hope that I can wake you up to abolish the evil. If you have an idea that anyone wants this, you're wrong. And she's sad that people want to fight it, but they give up too easily. And they say things that we can't give it up or abolish it. It's a necessary evil that maybe we should just regulate. And she says, good people, I'm telling you this story. It seems like you want it to continue. If you don't want it, why don't you try to find a way to defeat it instead of fighting over what's the best way to regulate and keep it going? Let's see. Washburn. Well, actually, we don't know her real name. Yeah. Washburn's the name that she wrote the book with. So, I'm having a bit of technical. Oh, there we go. It's working. Thank you. So at the time, there was a mindset that she was dealing with that the culture thought that men are just so full of lust that they can't be controlled, and there's fear. The problem is so big, we can't overcome it, and if we don't have prostitutes, then other people are going to get assaulted, and so they tolerated it. And she says, really, must a portion of the girls be sacrificed, put into everlasting darkness and despair, so that other women can have comfort and luxury? You're voting to keep it going because, these girls are wanting protection, the men are wanting entertainment, the merchant, saloon, and police want the money, and that's why you keep it going. When you're protecting your own family, you're failing. You must have a goal to protect all the families. And here's her picture. The woman, daughters, wives of other men. And here she's got a story of people who are widows ending up trafficked in there. She says there's thousands that if they can't afford their kids, they have to put their kids in some other home and go into prostitution. And something she thought that's interesting is she said the prostitutes she knew would never commit an abortion, but it was common at that time. The few children born in the underworld are never destroyed But she's like, oh, and the Christians tell us it'd be better if they were. And she says, there's nothing to justify murder. It's murder before, murder afterwards. And she says, we attempt to maintain our self-respect. The only thing that can be used as a stepping stone to redemption. When our pride and hope cease to be a domineering feature of one woman, she'll commit suicide. And she knew from experience she had attempted. And she said, what's going on that we have a problem? Part is that there was a mindset that men are inevitably going to go do crazy stuff, so just go and get it done and come back. So men were allowed and encouraged to be wild. Women had forever consequences if they did. She says no consequences for the man was a driver. Low wages, there was no way that a woman could pay enough for food and housing and the jobs that were available to them. And not enough help to get better jobs. And she also said something interesting, that every time there's an election, there's this performance that goes on. The politician is in need of votes, and it's really helpful to him to get the pastor on his side. So the sharp politician is going to show up at church, drop a bunch of money, and make a lot of noise with it, and suddenly the pastor's trying to get this guy elected, and it would be so much better if the pastors tried to fight prostitution and prevent it than getting these people involved that were just using them. And we don't know her name. She used pseudonyms before and afterwards, but her dream was that Jesus knew. So, about this time, there was a new secret society formed, and I showed you before, the first person to cross the river, the high-ranking Freemason, got all the pastors into the Odd Fellows, and now we're 50 years later, and it seems like lots and lots of pastors have been joining regularly, and it was that branch that formed this new cult that's special for Nebraska. Exarban is Nebraska spelled backwards. Making things backwards here is their goal. And it's a kind of Freemasonry with oaths of secrecy, and they worship different gods. And for their first ritual, that was a parade, they rode into the city on Rosh Hashanah, and they were met by a crowd, and the mayor handed them keys to the city, and he made this speech that says, we feel the presence of the Great Spirit that we bring, and we hope it's going to stimulate our trade and economy. I, as ruler of the city, on behalf of the citizens, surrender the key of the city to your care and keeping, and hope that your Royal Highness may use it to unlock our hearts and minds, and not just to our city, but the state as a whole. Does the mayor of Omaha have authority to give away the whole state? He actually does, because the rest of the state gave it to him through ritual the night before. And maybe they didn't know what they were doing, but the people of Omaha did this parade where they invited every county to make a float that would represent their identity and come, we'll have a contest for who has the best float, but then you've got to march in the parade and the procession. And the Douglas County float goes first as the conqueror, and they've even got a declaration that says, key of the state. And nobody complained about Douglas County saying that we're the key of the state, and they followed in line. So by ritual, they agreed to be conquered by this Douglas County that claims to be the conqueror. And I guess in political realms, all the time, people complain about why does Omaha dominate politics, and why does the rest of the state get laws passed that ruin things for them, but their ancestors gave it over by ritual, and I don't know, maybe one of you knows how to break that vow, but that was the start of it. Whatever goes first is the conqueror, and in the Exarban parades, it usually was Baal. And here's the write-up in the paper the day after that says, you have read the Bible story of the golden calf once molded in dishonor unto heaven, and they decided to make themselves a cow. We built a haughty, mighty bullock, representing the state of Nebraska. And we declare that no Moses is going to come tear it down. And we built it towering up to heaven, like the Tower of Babel. And it's like the god of all the thunders. Yep, that's Baal. And here's another float, and it's interesting to them that they have, when they did the parade, they put out booklets that had pictures and poems to go with every float, and they distributed it to the crowd before, so that every father is reading a poem about each float, the gods on it, to his family. And it seemed really important to the people running it that the people knew what they were doing. And even in this newspaper poem, it says, our royal pageant must have words, a picture writing, that the people seeing will know what's to follow, what the thing is we're doing, or else it has no meaning. So it's like the float's going to have meaning to the people that built it, but they thought it was really important that all of the families, the mothers, fathers participating, had pictures and words to tell about the meaning, was because I think they wanted the guilt. Like maybe the guilt wouldn't be real if there wasn't enough hints to tell us what's going on. So consent. Here's another float that's interesting. And yeah, for the first year, it was centered around this corn god, and they wanted you to fall in love with him. So the corn god defeats all these enemies and waters the ground with his tears and plants the land. He wants to be your father. And here's one of the floats. He fights the god of famine, and the people are so happy that they build him a castle and give him a human princess to be his wife. That's kind of weird. And hey, we got a class coming up that Brendan's going to be teaching Tuesdays, June 10th, 6 to 30 through 7:30. If you're interested, they might talk more about this stuff, like what are these like spirits that are being worshipped. Yeah, here's another float. The corn god is fighting off the grasshoppers for them. What's sad is that the people were getting destroyed by grasshoppers previously. There's a lot of books written about it. But the grasshopper plague that came to them hit them in the same territory where they had been shooting the bison to starve the Native Americans. So they were sowing starvation to the natives, and grasshoppers came and ate their food, but also their clothes, their wooden tools, rusted their iron tools, the leather. It was a bizarre thing, but it happened in the same place. But here is, Exarban telling us that the corn god's going to fight the locust for us. And here's another one. There's the corn god. Here's the Lord of the Treasury. That's a scary-looking monster on the back of it. And here we have Asherah, which they call her the Water Witch, and they also call her Queen of the Spirits. Queen of Heaven is a name in the Bible for Asherah. And she's got like 2 lions at the bottom of her throne, which is pretty typical in pictures of Asherah. And it's, out there worship. And here they say, peace, plenty, prosperity to everyone who's faithful to our new religion. And the day afterwards, it's in the newspaper, like all this stuff. And I think of silence by consent. If a pastor's reading this, maybe you should be concerned that this is what you hear about the event. It says, last night there were 10,000 happy people past dreaming where they were, each from their old religions broke and was the worshiper of something new. They left Christianity for something new. Here we see that our Omaha town spiritually changed into Baghdad. Baghdad is Babylon, mother of harlots. And, we've got peace to befall, a new era born, new world order, I guess. And we've got a new God that loves us all, the God of corn. And it turns out that having this pageant, having all these parades brought lots of people into town who spent money, and all the bankers were really excited to be rich. So they're like, oh, we should do this every year. And so the next year they had a feast of Olympia and worshipped every god of the Greek mythology you've ever heard of, and probably 20 more that you haven't. What's prominent is here. The next year, we got to handing the key over, something they did every year. And this time, they're handing it to someone who is dressed up like Baal in the flesh. So, yeah, I guess I don't have highlighting on this one, but if you see the names, like they've got the Greek name for Baal, they got the Roman name for Baal, they've got him sitting on a throne, dominion over the whole earth. And Baal has a lot of names, and he kind of looks the same in all the countries he's recognized. But yeah, there it's highlighted. We turn the keys of the city over and to someone who's dressed like Baal. And no float received a more hearty reception than the goddess of agriculture. There we go. So when I think of consent, it says the people are cheering for every god that comes in front of them, and the people of Nebraska especially love the goddess of agriculture. So they know what they're doing. And tied with the goddess of agriculture is the god of wine. Alcohol is something that was shows up in the news all over. Omaha was famous for saloons that never closed, but I guess they honored that god. Here's another one, Queen of the Night, with the place of honor held by death, and chaos and sleep and hypnosis come with her. And here we got war, and he delights in slaughter, and his companions are terror, fear, and contention. And here we've got this medicine guy who loves the wisdom of the serpent. Oh, and besides parading gods, they also had lots of men dressed like women. And that's a feature of worshiping Asherah. And besides doing it in the streets, that's a duplicate. Besides doing the Baal worship in the streets, they also had drag shows that brought lots of people from all over. They did that every week. Here is a bunch of men dressed like women. And here it is in the newspaper. And here's President Taft coming to Omaha for a drag show. And there's Teddy Roosevelt. So, and Woodrow Wilson, too. So, a lot of people complain that maybe the West and the East Coast are contaminating Omaha or the Midwest, but, we had really heavy Satanism and drag shows a really long time ago, and a lot of the U.S. presidents came here. The stuff came from here. And another ritual that was pretty common for them is they would get someone dressed like a priest or a cardinal to put a crown on the head and a ring on the finger of whoever's going to be king of Exarban for the year. Here's other pictures. And usually the king was a rich, old guy, and the queen was some kind of teenager, not his wife. And that's weird. And it's pretty easy to look through the books and figure out who the kings were and who the queens were. They advertised that. It's kind of harder to find out who this clergymen were, but from all I can tell, they weren't real clergymen. For the names I have found, one of them was a assistant to President Truman. And it's interesting that the occult wants to dress up like the church, because I guess if they can't get real consent, they can forge it. I don't know. That's a ritual. There's meaning behind it. And something that's interesting is these parades went on for nearly 50 years, and that's the red line. For I think it's 48 years. For all the years that they were doing an annual parade to all these gods with the keys, there was 20% less rain. And the Dust Bowl happened during that time. So there was signs in the heavens related to the stuff they were doing on Earth. And I'm seeing it's my arrows got adjusted or something happened. You can't really see it, but the best rain we've had in the last 100 years was in 1964 after Billy Graham had a crusade, had people say, I believe in Jesus, on the grounds of Exarban on Rosh Hashanah. The formatting cut that off, but maybe I'll send it out afterwards with a better picture where you can see it. But also 2020 is one of the lower years for rainfall. It was a dry year. My arrows are wrong, but here's Billy Graham preaching, and it said 26,000 people attended his last night of preaching at the Exarban grounds, and hundreds of people came forward to be saved. But yeah, so that's exorbitant, and I feel like there's consequences still. Well, that's some crazy. But here's another interesting story. In 1859, this guy Newton Mann was the first pastor to publicly embrace Darwinian evolution. His doctrine made him an undesirable minister, and he spent years outside of the ministry. And the people of Omaha heard about it, and they raised money and brought him to Omaha. During his time, as they're funding him, he published books on socialism, biblical criticism. He also founded a unity club that had influence here. And after we've got the spiritual thing going, that now churches are saying evolution might be true, lo and behold, a Nebraska farmer finds a fossil tooth. And from this whole tooth, they published an article saying, we have found the missing link. Nebraska man proves evolution. It was actually a pig tooth. But they published this tooth far and wide. They took lots of pictures of it, sent letters everywhere. Look, evolution is proven. And since we have proven evolution, let's put it in the schools. And here we have this Nebraska lawyer who was in politics, ran for Congress, started off as a Christian but was a Freemason, and he defends the Christians in this court trial that was a circus. And, the defendant wasn't even teaching evolution, but he was, they drummed up this trial to have it in court. The prosecution was led by Williams Jennings Bryan from Nebraska. And here, churches that were discipled by man from Omaha were helping the atheists come up with questions that would make Williams Jennings Bryan look foolish. And, William Jennings Bryan is defending Christians, but he's a Freemason, and he looks stupid. Here's some political cartoons from that time, The Rise and Fall of Man. And here he looks like a monkey. And so the show trial made Christianity look bad. And, though the prosecution won, public opinion was forever changed. And for his efforts, he was rewarded by having a statue in the National Statuary Hall to represent Nebraska. The best of Nebraska is the Mason who bungled the Scopes trial, and now evolution's, worldwide. Also about that time, they built a new Capitol, and they decorate it with all these images to depict the creation of the cosmos and also have all these gods. In the center of the Capitol, they have this Asherah on the throne. And what's interesting is, I was in the Capitol on a day when they were debating trans surgeries on children. And in the daytime, they did this ritual where they had all these children sit in a circle on the floor around Asherah's throne and hear this message on how they need rights and stuff. One room away from where they're debating it. It was crazy. But also on the floor, we have all these missing links celebrating Nebraska's role and making evolution acceptable. So that's crazy. The next story. In the 1900s to the 30s, Omaha had a crime boss, kind of like Al Capone kind of person who ran all the crime rings, the gambling, the prostitution. And during his reign, all the criminals and also all the police answered to him. He gained his power through giving food, coal, or employment help to immigrants, orphans, and widows. The church wasn't doing their job, and it was an open door for him to get power. Government help at that time was so meager and humiliating that it was avoided. He went out of his way to keep churches fighting against each other, and he also paid some of them to not talk about him. And he would print cards insulting to Catholics and put them in the Protestant churches, and Protestant churches would tolerate them. But then he made it look like his opponents were the ones doing the attacking, and it was a way to divide and get people onto his side. And this guy, Jim Dahlman, was his partner. Tom Dennison was in the shadows. He got this guy to be the mayor, to be the front for it. And he kept Omaha as the wettest city in America, and saloons doubled. And after he won 3 successive terms, someone else got in who was supported by the churches, and they wanted to destroy the new guy that got in. So they came up with this, they framed someone and made this lynching scandal as a way to embarrass the government and make the mayor look bad. So they accused the guy falsely of assaulting a woman and put all kinds of stuff in the papers to say, we know he did it, we know he's going to get a light sentence. And that made the people incited to riot. And they were also paid agents driving people around, giving them alcohol, bringing the people in. And as the crowd's gathering, the police sent 50 of their people home. And the crowd smashed into some pawn shops, got some guns, started shooting the place up, setting the courthouse on fire. And eventually the police that were not using the power they had realized they were in trouble because the flames are growing in the courthouse. And so they say, hey, we will give you the one you want, save the rest of us. So they made a sacrifice and handed him over. And I guess my next picture is graphic. But he was hung, he was shot with over 1,000 bullets, drug around town, and then burned. And what's sad is that happened on a Sunday, and there's a lot of people wearing suits. They went to church that morning, and then they went to the lynching without changing clothes. Eventually, the military was brought in to protect the black people who were getting assaulted and, in danger of getting murdered wherever they showed their face. But the government would only protect them in a certain district, and anywhere else that was free for all to attack them. Here's some church unity. 1 week later, all the churches and synagogues were praying for the mayor to recover. I guess I didn't say it, but the mayor came out of the courthouse and said, please don't do this is wrong. And the people grabbed him and put a rope around his neck and tried to lynch him too. And some detectives got him away, but he was critically injured. So the mayor is sick, and the churches are praying for him. But, for having all the Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish churches praying for the mayor to recover, where's the repentance? And here's some different letters that pastors preached or said. And there was some anger, but the pastors blamed the newspapers for the false information. And in spite of numerous pictures of the murderers, and people even boasted at their roles in it, nobody was punished. And Jim Dahlman won every election afterwards until he died in office. And now we have a new secret society here to try to help people get what they want. And so it says to lovers of law, order, justice, saloons are a nuisance, we need to close them down. There's all this promiscuity, we're going to fight that too. Also, we don't like Catholic newspapers, but we're going to bring fairness. I don't know. Think this will be good or bad? It's the KKK. So again, they're doing this church disunity thing. And someone who fought them well was a pastor, John Albert Williams. Hard to see him, but there was a black pastor who started a newspaper as a way to bring his people together, bring some truth, encourage the people, and he did some good stuff. Yeah, there's some of the points of the KKK, what they were trying to do. And what's interesting is, when I learned about KKK in school, they talked about how they hate the black people, which they do, but they also hate the Jewish people, the Catholics, and any immigrants, and people fell for it. And so the mayor, who was mostly a bad mayor, did his part to ban the meetings, but it was growing. In 1923, it says there were 4,500 members in Nebraska. The black papers, the Catholic papers, and the Jewish papers all reported and demanded action, and they outed people like the Protestant pastors who had participated. Malcolm X, when he was in the womb, his mom was visited by the KKK at night and threatened. And eventually, because of the stuff that happened to him, his parents moved out of town, but his dad was assassinated, and he grew up with a lot of trauma. And so he became an evangelist for Islam. And that's a sad thing. Yeah. Tom Dennison had rule of the city for a whole lot of years. He did try to take down the KKK, which is good, but he kept the pride flowing. Eventually, the Jewish people got together when after there was an assassination, and they finally got rid of him. Yeah. abortion comes from Nebraska like nowhere else. Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger funded the defense of a doctor, and that case was used as precedent for Roe v. Wade. And he also had this fake church that they used to run people to California for abortion before it was legal here. He paid for the research on the RU486 drug. About all his money goes there. He also paid for IUDs to be what they are. So that's Nebraska. Yeah. And then, yeah. Back in the day of this time of the KKK, Black citizens were often treated poorly by bank personnel, and many of them had no money. And so there was a new financial institution open for them, but bad stuff happened.
John DeCamp lays the blame for the contamination of Boys Town on the one-time leader of the National Black Republican Council, Larry King.
Larry King was the fastest rising black star in the entire Republican Party of the United States during all of the 1980s. And he was also one of the most evil individuals in this country in terms of being a dealer of children, in terms of being a thief, 40 million that they documented he stole, and in terms of using and compromising and corrupting one after another politicians.
The base for his network was a small people's bank in Omaha, Nebraska, the Franklin Federal Credit Union. Larry King was its general manager.
There we go. So they were trafficking children out of this credit union in North Omaha. And when there was an investigation, the guy who was investigating it died suddenly when his airplane blew up and all his evidence was taken away. One of the witnesses was pressured to lie about what he had seen, and when he hesitated, his brother was murdered. A key witness was pressured to alter her testimony, and when she refused, they charged her with perjury and gave her 25 years in jail, and Larry King only got 15 for embezzling the $40 million. So here's a newspaper. It says it was a carefully crafted hoax. And here's another one. This guy was unjustly accused of the abuse, and we see this girl as the terrible person, and the guy is a victim. So she was a child. Stuff happened. And probably there's a lot of us in the room today that have met someone who's, we've either met the victims or met someone who's interacted with them. But for a town that's full of people who've seen evidence that children were getting trafficked, the innocent were punished and the guilty got off.
Every victim witness who stepped forward in any way, or even was a potential witness that somebody heard about, has either been killed, put in jail under some theory or other, terrified or run out of the state, discredited. Every perpetrator, even the convicted ones, have been treated as conquering heroes. Obviously, the FBI was protecting something a lot more significant than a bunch of old pedophiles having improper relations with little boys. They were protecting something a lot more significant than a bunch of drug peddlers. They were protecting, in my opinion, they were protecting some very prominent politicians, some very powerful and wealthy individuals associated with those politicians and the political system, up to and including the highest political people in this entire country.
Beyond belief that arguably the most powerful person in the world, the President of the United States, in the form of Richard Nixon, could not prevent the investigation of Watergate, or that President Reagan could not prevent the investigation of Iran-Contra. And yet somehow this group of unnamed, unknown, anonymous individuals in Omaha, Nebraska have such power they can control and protect all of these people from being investigated.
John DeCamp, who was one of those people we just saw, thought that the power was with Exarban. And he says Exarban members and their corporations they controlled, poured their money into the Franklin Credit Union, and it was Exarban firms that were on the advisory board. And here, that's a photo I took directly from the book, that he says, when the investigation came out, the exorbitant crowd formed ranks around those that were accused, and they, told the senators, the congressmen, to lay off the Franklin investigation. Most of the senators were terrified. Exorbitant could make or break political careers. They give the campaigns a lot of money, and many of the senators get, consulting fees, and they get these positions that you get paid and you don't have to show up for. And then about Exorbitant, he also says they do rituals that are always pagan, and they parade around, men dressed like women or like goddesses. And so that's a problem. But, and I kind of see this as tied to the Sand Creek Massacre. Like, children were killed and mutilated, nothing ever happened. Here we got children hurt, nothing happened. But in the days of the Brownsville revival, that is hard to see, I apologize. There was a time when some pastors from Trinity Lifegate went to the Brownsville revival, and as they got there, it was pretty full, and they were maybe going to get turned away, but someone heard, "Oh, you're from Omaha. We got some prophetic words for Omaha. Come in, come in." And one of the things they said there was that Native Americans are key to revival in the United States, and Omaha is key to going to the root of reconciliation with them. The wave of God's Spirit that crashes down upon in these end times will be part of the release of revival that comes to the Native Americans. And that was given to the Trinity pastors in 1997. And I apologize, it's hard to read.
Also called Pine Ridge. The four establishments are legally allowed to do business. However, their practices are predatory and immoral. On average, 11,000 cans of beer are sold daily in White Clay, which totals to a little over 4 million cans a year. The four liquor stores share a yearly revenue of around $3 million, 300,000 of which is tax revenue for the state of Nebraska. Pine Ridge Reservation is dry, meaning both the possession and consumption of alcohol is illegal. Consuming alcohol on the premises of an off-sale liquor store is also illegal, as well as in public and on county roads. Clearly, a town of 14 people could not consume 11,000 cans of beer a day. So that begs the question, where is all the alcohol going, and what are the effects?
Well, if you look in that pile right there, I see 3 pop cans and 100 beer cans. Usually in about a week's time, I'll have about 1,000 pounds. Anywhere from 1,000 to 1,200, 15. The most I ever took was 1,600 pounds, and that's only on my pickup. I don't have a trailer or anything. 99% of the cans come from White Clay.
And here's an interesting story where there is a bit of revival. So in 1890, U.S. Congress passed a law to create a 50-mile buffer zone around the Pine Ridge Reservation. But Exorbitant member Teddy Roosevelt canceled it, and saloons immediately moved to the border of the Pine Ridge. The liquor stores would sell to people that were already drunk. They would sell to minors. They would sell in exchange for stolen goods, or for sex, or putting liens on people's houses. In 1999, the Lakota people attempted to march in protest of 2 murders and have a prayer meeting. And for all this time, they'd been begging to have police in White Clay and to shut the thing down. And for all that time, there's no money to have police. But if you're going to have a prayer meeting, there is money.
Peace! wants to know where.
And we're going to be coming down. We're going to be between these two silver buildings. We're going to be praying for this town. So you need to move this line to the other side of town.
Okay, the agreement was between these two buildings. That's what Mr. Bellecourt agreed to last night.
Well, that could be. From what I heard, it was right here on the street.
Okay. That was just the agreement last night, Mr. Bellecourt, between these buildings.
Okay, I'll check out with them.
Great.
Again.
Thank you.
This is the Nebraska State Patrol. May I have your attention, please? You are welcome to Nebraska. You may not pass the yellow tape, or enforcement action will be taken.
Yeah, so White Clay is like maybe 6 hours from Omaha, but they were able to somehow get 150 police there for that day, and they brought a bus because they were planning to arrest people, so grandfathers got arrested. And it just makes you wonder what kind of spiritual power there. Like, the president made an agreement, we want the native people drunk, and the Nebraska governor and liquor commissioners and all these people were having their campaigns funded by like Anheuser-Busch and all the others. Like, the liquor money was keeping government in power. So government didn't want the liquor to go away, and they didn't even want a prayer meeting because somehow that'd break their power. I don't know. But 4 years later, in 2003, they planned another protest march, and this time they got some agreement from actual Nebraska citizens. And the Nebraska people participated by having a time of repentance and then marching to meet them. So we've got a march from South Dakota, a march from Nebraska, and this time they were able to have a march.
Today, we are going to march with our prayers. We're going to march with love and unity against hate. Hate, the Washichus. Oh, etc. Let's march. Many of the children here have been orphaned by what happens in this small hamlet. Many children suffer through their lives. Many children are the victims of abuse because of what happens here. We have children here in this community, great many of them, who suffer from the impact of fetal alcohol syndrome. That is indeed our fault. That responsibility falls on us.
But in 2005, they did get some other pastors to get involved. And so in the next video, the first guy is an Episcopal bishop, and we've also got some other missionaries that started showing up to meetings and started speaking out.
I've been asked to present to the commissioners these petitions signed by 58 residents of Sheridan County and some folks from Pine Ridge and one, I think, from Box Butte County as well, which says simply, "Dear Commissioners, we oppose the application by Thomas Bernard for a new liquor license in the town of White Clay, Nebraska. We believe that a new license in White Clay is in clear conflict with the interest of public health and education in Sheridan County and the Pine Ridge Reservation."
When we first came and visited this area, I was taken to White Clay as, oh, you got to see this, as a almost tourist attraction, but with an appalling point of view.
Can you tell me where a person living on the reservation is expected to drink that beer without breaking the law?
I don't think I said this earlier, but there was this town had 14 people, no schools, no post office, no church, 4 beer stores that sold about $4 million of beer a year. It was 11,000 cans a day. And all of these beer stores were the kind where you're supposed to take it and carry it away. But the alcohol is not allowed on the reservation, and it's not allowed in the car. So there's no place to legally drink it. And people would drink it in the parking lots anyway, and they were just lying around drunk, and there was lots of murders, lots of robbery. It was some pretty sad footage they had of like what it looked like.
What is still the issue here is we have to make a decision. We have to make a decision based on free enterprise, moral values.
But there is an order that's established by the highest order of all. There is an order to that, okay? And the order to that is life first, liberty, and then the pursuit of happiness. And free enterprise is not the number one thing, okay? It is not the most important thing in this country. It's not. And it's not what we fight for. And you know what, guys? 90% of those folks that are on the street, I know, because I've been down there every day for the last 6 months. And I know they are veterans, that's right. They are people who have fought for this country. And they are people who don't want to be drunk, okay? Their choice, they decided to take a drink, and unfortunately, it got a hold of them. They did not decide to die a slow death on the street in White Clay, Nebraska.
For a season, the government was making excuses and saying, oh, if we close the beer stores, they're just going to drive farther and just be drunk driving. But when it finally got shut down, that's not what happened. It was a miracle. So here's the Republican senator hugging a Democrat. There were probably only 2 people in our legislature that cared about the people of White Clay. One Republican, one Democrat. They were happy when the victory came. And what's interesting, here's a newspaper article that was talking, like, in 2017, the liquor stores finally were shut down. And what's interesting is it said, what made the difference? The Lakota were fighting it for 100 years. There was a activist that was fighting it his whole life for like 20 years. But the day that they had victory, they said that several witnesses provided key testimonies, these 3 people that worked for a Christian ministry. And the line after it is, one of the missionaries that made a difference was 22 years old. And he says, I'm going to be out of a job. It's going to be good. And so I love this of where did the victory come? It came through the church, and especially people that were willing to have no job. They had a mission, Lakota Hope in White Clay. It's closed now because there's no drunk people there. They got victory and had to move their ministry elsewhere.
It's called the Skid Row of the Plains. A shame on Nebraska, but look at White Clay now, 6 years after the State Liquor Control Commission stopped renewing the licenses of 4 beer stores. The litter is gone, and so are people passed out on the street. KETV News Watch 7's Andrew Ozaki recently returned to the border town and shows us what became of those beer stores that once sold millions of cans a year.
White Clay in 2016, where 4 beer stores would sell nearly 4 million cans a year, mostly to residents of the nearby Pine Ridge Reservation, where alcohol is banned.
They were killing themselves. It was like it was a slow suicide.
White Clay today.
It's now a place where there's all kinds of good traffic, there's businesses that are going on.
A Family Dollar store doing so well, a Dollar General is about to open up on the other end of town. 2 of the former beer stores remain closed. This one is now an artist maker space and a tourist destination for Nebraska Passport.
That's what we're doing. We're creating jobs. We're creating for people to support themselves and their families.
Another store that once sold beer now offers salvation.
It used to be my favorite bar, and now it's my favorite church.
Silas Condon is one of its members, now drawn to White Clay, seeking the Bible instead of booze.
Finally listening to God and Jesus to help me to change and stop living evil and hurting people.
Holly Hosey manages the artist maker space. She can feel the change.
I think it's going to take a long time for us to get over what the alcoholism has caused to the Native American people. But it's a beginning.
And according to the pastor of this church, New Hope.
I battled alcohol and drugs for years before God set me free. And I know that if God can turn around a scumbag like me, he can turn a liquor store into a church too.
In White Clay, Andrew Ozaki, KETV, News Watch 7.
Revival, local Omaha TV station picked it up. That's inspiring to me. But a problem we still have is our streets are named in honor of people that committed atrocities against the Native people. And besides Harney that I told you about, Cass was the architect of the Trail of Tears and also really big into slavery. Douglas was big into slavery too, and Dodge was a bit hostile to natives. But then Jackson was the president who carried out the Trail of Tears, and Harney, the butcher, massacred them, shot at white flags. And what's interesting, like, a cycle that perpetuates in Omaha, like, what is Omaha known for? Oh yeah, there's the streets, Cass, Dodge, Harney, Jackson. What are we famous for? Potholes. And they raise taxes, they do bonds to take care of it. And here's a political cartoon from 30 years ago. And 30 years ago, English language was different and they called it chuckhole instead of pothole. Our language has changed, the problem hasn't. So like, our streets are rotten. Maybe God's trying to say something to us. And yeah, about Harney Street, I'd also say there were like 2 really noticeable scandalous lynchings. I only showed you one of them. But both of them, wherever they grabbed the guy, they killed him on Harney Street. And the church that brought evolution to the world is also on Harney Street. And Lakota people have told me that they feel a heaviness like being around that. So maybe we should give it a new name. 2018. So Iowa is the place where this anti-Catholic secret society founded, and Omaha was a big place for it. And in 2018, Lou Engle felt like he was supposed to do a prayer meeting in Omaha, and it would like change the world. And man, it's an amazing video, but since the time I might not show it to you, but like they saw these signs leading to Iowa being the field of dreams. And he took it as a sign they needed to pray against abortion in Iowa. So he came and had this prayer meeting at Victory Church. I think I'm seeing some faces that were there. And I'm going to skip the video. But he wanted the Protestant people there to pray for Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. And he said, Roe v. Wade will get overturned. And it's crazy. But like, that is what happened. Kavanaugh was confirmed, and it was an Iowa senator that brought the news of that.
It's not a pretty story, it's not a happy story, but it's the truth. And the truth will set you free.
2019 was the 100-year anniversary of the Will Brown lynching, and something that was maybe helpful that they did is the leaders of the government had a bunch of events to remember it and put out there the wrong that was done. Like, they had a whole hour talk of like, this is what the accusation was. We know the guy was innocent. Here's all the politics in play. And at Kavanaugh's talk there, he said what was really going on in the underlying current is people were afraid that black people were going to start voting, so they did all these things to intimidate them. And then he says, I, as county commissioner, I want you guys to vote. And he had a table full of voter registrations as a way to try to reverse what was done in a small way. And in 2019, Williams Jennings Bryan, who was representing us, was replaced by Standing Bear. So cool. 2020, Ruth Bader Ginsburg died and was replaced by Amy Coney Barrett, which is like a word that Lou Engle had. It was crazy that it played out years later. But we still got Exarban that's running our state. And so, man, that is hard to see, but I highlighted some of the people that are leaders of Exarban now, and it includes Pete Ricketts, Jim Pillen family, and Mike Flood. That's who runs Exarban. And they took the Bail Parade from being once a year to like every day.
Governor Pete Ricketts and First Lady Suzanne Shore launched the Nebraska Capitol Art Experience, an initiative to connect all Nebraskans to the artwork in the state capitol building. Ricketts says the Nebraska State Capitol is filled with art that is beautiful and rich in meaning, and through the Capitol Art Experience, Nebraskans from across the state can now learn about the art online. During the event, First Lady Shore shared details of the art program and the inspiration behind it.
It features the Genius of Creative Energy, which is just down the hallway from us. And we think there's going to be a lot of questions about what is the significance of that image. And we want to utilize that curiosity to show off all of the art in the Capitol and the jewel that we have here.
Nebraskans can now go to www.nebraskacapitolart.com to learn about the Capitol artwork and the artists responsible for its creation.
Yeah, well, something they did is they made Baal the default license plate for the state of Nebraska. So that happened in 2022. It might last for 6 years. It might last for more. And here's a video.
In the before, there was nothingness. No sound, no form, an infinite void. Until something. Light. From an unseen force streaking across an empty universe, its edges defined by darkness. Fiery stars and planets born in its wake. Lightning. The great illuminator. Channeled through the hands of the genius of creative energy. From upon his cosmic chariot, the genius harnessed the power of the elements moving through oblivion, bringing the forces to the earth below that was to become our land. Deep underneath lies the story of Nebraska.
That was blasphemous, and genius of creative energy or great illuminator, like those are names for Satan, but that's what's on our license plate. And the people who put it there knew what they were doing. So I don't know if you can see that picture. It's kind of hard to see. It's subtle, but naked guy holding the lightning. So something you might consider. Oh, yeah, the year that they put it on our plates, the river that we get our state, that are named after, Nebraska gets our name from this river that's now called Platte, and that river that we get our identity from went totally dry the year that they put that on the plates. So something you might consider is it's $5 a year to get a custom plate. It's like $40 a year if you have cutesy words with it, but if you just get the random numbers, it's $5 a year to get something else. And then I guess the last thing I have is abortion, which has been such a scandal and drama the last 1 year. In 2024, there was a ballot initiative in South Dakota that would have said abortion's legal for the first trimester, plus later for health reasons. The churches of South Dakota opposed it, and it failed. But the same year, the Knights of Exarban brought a similar measure with the unlimited first trimester abortion and legal for medical emergency, as well as 2 other reasons, to Nebraska. And the Knights of Exarban convinced churches to get support, get behind it, and that one passed. So in South Dakota, the churches said, we should not do it, it's wrong, just vote no. And they also had this letter signed by 250 pastors to say, vote no to it. And they got victory. In Nebraska, here's, Pete Ricketts doing his speeches for the initiative he was behind. And one of their tactics is they put 2 things on the ballot that were pretty close to each other, but they told us the other one's scary, so give in and vote for this one. Oh, that's hard to see, but one of the things they told us is Nebraska can be the first to pass a ballot initiative to protect against abortion, but Arkansas already has a ballot initiative to fix their constitution to stop abortion, and they did that in 1988, so we're not the first. And here's like a letter that was sent from pastors to their church, and it says, this, it says our current laws need to be saved, and they didn't realize that maybe the current laws have abortion almost always legal. But here's maybe a real motive. It says we need to save parental rights, which Jody Washburn talked about. People want to save their daughters, not the other people. So here we're going to save parental notification so we can protect our own daughters, and we're not bothered that the rule makes abortion almost always legal. And then this letter, lots of people were told this, that this other evil initiative has the exact same wording that passed in 7 other states, which is not true. There are 0 states that had anything with that kind of language. And they said, Kansas, Kentucky, and Ohio passed a ballot initiative to expand abortion. Not true. Kentucky and Kansas voted it down. So here's Ballotopedia. I apologize, it's hard to read, but the red X's are for states that rejected the ballot initiative for abortion. Other places get victory. Why are they telling us to be scared? And some people would say, if you confront them with it, they'd say, oh, everything that passed was pro-choice, everything that failed was pro-life, abortion always wins. But this Montana Born Alive Act, they'd save babies that are already born with a law that says right to life starts with breathing air. All abortion at any age is legal. And the other two, Kansas and Kentucky, would have kept abortion legal too. And here's the Guardian. It says, this Kansas ballot initiative is confusing. Which way should we vote? And they say, some people think this could be a litmus test for, what is the public sentiment, but the text on the language is so hard to understand, it doesn't prove what the people believe. But here's a church, and a Christian page, and the church says, vote no to this thing. It's dangerous because it's expanding the power of the legislature to keep it legal. And and there's words in it that prevent us from ever ending it. The words were to make it regulatable, nothing else. Something that's interesting is here's a weather map. I got this from National Weather Service. This is the Omaha area. Hard to read, I apologize, but if you see the years on there, these are the storms that were big enough to remember after they were over. And you can see there's a lot of years where we had no storms that were really interesting, but in the last year we had 5 or 6 really big tornado, hail, hurricane kind of storms in the summer, plus 2 blizzards that were the time of all this storm. Here's one of them. Here's the people that signed the 434, the Pete Ricketts one, they were tricked. Here's the people that wanted all abortion, no limits. We had drought that year. We had tornadoes. And then we filed one to actually end abortion. And when we filed, it started raining, and coming out of a drought, we had more rain in 2 months than the previous 9 put together. And here's another letter from a church. We're going to support Pete Ricketts' initiative. Why? Even though it doesn't align with our theological views, we're scared that the other one's going to win. I don't know. It was sad stuff. But one of the worst floods we've had in the last 100 years happened last year, and it started flooding the day after there was a church that said no to choosing life, did a ceremony on the river. And here's some stats on all the storms and all the hailstones, National Weather Service. The people for Choose Life tried to get signatures for that 2 months, but a lot of churches were scared and they told us no. But on July 1st, we had our prayer meeting and gather all the pages we had, all of the work we had done, and had a celebration, and pray for this to end. And that day there was 4 inches of rain, and not with tornadoes or hail. It was just gentle rain. There wasn't any other rainstorms the whole year that were 2 inches of rain, but we had rain on the day of our prayer meeting. We didn't get on the ballot, and when they were counting the signatures, the counties that said yes to abortion, I showed you the map earlier, they got pounded by a hurricane. Or at least it's equivalent to a hurricane, how strong the wind was. And it was record. Here's the miles per hour wind in all these places. And there was a power outage that took out record numbers of electricity for all over town. And some of the people were out of power for a week or 10 days. They sent armies of power trucks to fix this. And what's interesting is the city was devastated by the storm, but a lot of the people that supported Choose Life and said we want to end, not regulate, said the storm passed them over. And I don't know if you want to share testimonies. We're right at 8, or I don't know. It was a cool thing. I can move on. Yeah, they're over there if you want to talk to them. And then afterwards, we went into drought, and here's the weather saying September is the driest we've ever seen. I went to election. The one that Ricketts was with passed. They were pretty close in what they would have accomplished. And what's interesting is we got these pro-life groups saying we won, and Planned Parenthood says, like, hey, no matter what you're hearing, we're still open. Abortion's legal. It is. The ballot initiative that passed did nothing except cement the laws where they were wide open legal. And we had the driest January ever. Here's a map of places that have more snow than Omaha, Nebraska at the end of January. It's like the entire nation, including Texas and Louisiana. And yeah, there were pastors praying. I got to skip through, but like, this is a beautiful thing. Like, they're in the Capitol on their knees saying, to us belongs shame. And man, I got to skip through all these beautiful videos.
You, oh Lord.
It was some good stuff. And some of you were there. And they're working to get a letter from the pastor saying we need to end abortion. And that's a cool strategy. At the end of first week of February, we were setting a record for most days without snow. But then we filed Choose Life again and started getting signatures. And that week we did get a snow. And I guess for where we are tonight, there is a, bill for legislature this session to say we want sports, women's sports should be for women, women's bathrooms should be for women. And we had all these faith leaders, like pastors, get together and write a letter saying that they want boys and girls' bathrooms. KTV says it's more than 100. It was less. And it also says Nebraska faith leaders. There was a bunch from other states. But they put out this letter, and it was effective. And the senator that brought this bill to protect women changed her mind and begged people to pass an amendment to say, oh, bathrooms don't count, boys can be in bathrooms. So probably that's what they're talking about right now in the Capitol in Lincoln. Probably they'll be on the news. Protect girls in the sports, but not the bathrooms, because that's what the pastors wanted. So, hey, that's my talk. Let's pray about this stuff. I'm impressed by you sitting through all that miserable. There's a lot of sad stuff, but the things I share, most of it I feel like there's still power there, still a pattern.